Yo, stop scrolling. She shot my niece. This ain't some neighborhood drama. It's a crime scene, a courtroom, and my family's worst nightmare. Hit like, smash subscribe, and stay till the end. Because I'm the judge who heard it all, and you won't believe what came next. Everyone in that subdivision knew the same stories. The manic lawn inspections, the letter with the red stamp, the woman with a voice that carried like thunder across cul-de-sacs. People called her Karen because it fit, not because of a name, but because of the way she could turn a backyard barbecue into a legal notice. She was a small storm with big bark, and for years her storms blew at everyone else's windows. My niece, Layla, was 13 when we moved into the street. She had a laugh that sounded like a summer song and a skateboard that ate cracks in the pavement like candy. To her, the neighborhood was a map of secret forts. To Karen, the neighborhood was a set of rules that no one else seemed to respect. At first it was petty, a note about unapproved garden stones, a complaint about a basketball hoop placed 2 inches over an invisible line. Then it escalated. People who once waved at each other started locking doors. My sister tried to keep the peace. She trimmed hedges, painted fences, answered every email with extra apologies. But the emails kept coming. Each one read like a page from a play where Karen always wrote the final act. On the morning of the incident, the neighborhood was the ordinary kind of quiet that smells like cut grass and engine oil. Layla had an audition that afternoon. She was practicing lines in our kitchen, chewing her words like gum, when my sister looked at me and said, "This one's different. Karen's been watching the kids. I can feel it." I should have believed her. It started with a confrontation in the driveway. Karen accused Layla and her friends of trespassing on community property, which in Karen's mind included a strip of gravel between 2 mailboxes. Voices rose. Words can be weapons when they come sharpened by a lifetime of resentment. My sister stepped between them, palms open, voice steady, trying to reason. The confrontation ended with a slammed door and a promise. If they touched her property again, she would call the police. No one expected a gun. Not in this neighborhood. Not a gun from someone who used HOA forms like devotional pamphlets. But Karen had been preparing in private. Years of bitterness, private purchases, whispered threats. It is the quiet things, the slow accumulations, that make explosions inevitable. That evening, Layla and 3 friends walked home from a neighbor's house. They were still laughing when Karen stepped out on her porch, sunlight turning her hair to a halo. She shouted, something about nerve and respect. The kids froze. My sister, who had been sitting in the living room, rushed outside to intercept. She pushed the teenagers behind her like a human shield. And then, in the blink of a heartbeat, a gun fired. Time did what time does in moments like these. It folded. The sound was a clean, bright punctuation against the warm hum of suburban life. Layla stumbled, a small body collapsing into someone's arms. We screamed. My sister was shouting her name. Someone was already dialing 911. The ambulance ride is something I can replay in every detail. The sterile light, the trained calm of paramedics, the stiffness of strangers' hands trying to stitch an impossible thing back together. In the ER, we watched monitors beep with the same unstoppable rhythm as prayer. The surgeons fought like freight ships in a storm. We kept chanting the name that had lit up our life less than an hour before. When the police arrived, cameras and lights turned our cul-de-sac into a stage. Karen sat on her porch with a blanket around her shoulders, eyes wide and dry as if she had become a spectator to her own deed. She told officers she fired a warning shot, a phrase that would become poison in every report. She said she felt threatened. She said she had followed all the HOA rules. But the evidence is a language of its own. The bullet would later tell a story the mouth could not. Shell casings, witness accounts, the trajectory through the hedge, all those facts began to paint a geometry of how a child's laughter had come undone. As a judge, I had to keep my professional distance. Even now, my voice is trained to weigh evidence like a scale. But I am also human. The question arrived later in an ethics form, written in bureaucratic ink. Was there a conflict if I presided? I hesitated in a way a judge rarely does. For the first time in decades, the bench felt like a plank built over a crevasse. Investigators moved through the neighborhood with methodical care. Neighbors were interviewed under fluorescence and coffee stains. Some were honest. Some were protective. A few lied, their memory softened by fear or by the desire to stay off the front page. The videos from doorbell cameras were grainy, but their angles spoke plainly. One clip captured the exact moment the gun cleared its chamber. 2 days later, Layla took her last breath. The hospital became both a grave and a courthouse, a place where life and law collided under the same fluorescent hum. The public statements began. Karen's attorney called it a tragic accident. The HOA board issued a statement about neighbor disputes. My niece's school posted a candle emoji on their social feed and asked for donations. Social media split the neighborhood in half, and each division dug trenches deep enough to hide a generation. At the request of the prosecution, I recused myself from the preliminary administrative hearings. That's protocol. But someone in my family leaked the story to a local reporter, and it spread faster than anyone could control. My name and role were now embedded in the narrative. There would be questions later: impartiality, recusal, whether a judge can truly remove the weight of family from the scales of justice. I slept once, then not at all. I went through the motions: calls to family, signature of documents, 1,000 tiny legal boxes checked, and at night I heard the echo of Layla's laugh, like a ghost with perfect timing. Part 1 ends where many tragedies do, with the verdict of the coroner and the decision to charge. A grand jury returned an indictment: aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and later updated to include aggravated attempted murder. The prosecutor decided Layla's age and the circumstances demanded the harshest approach. Karen was arrested and booked. She sat in a holding cell the next morning, eyes like coal, telling anyone who would listen that she was a victim of trespass and neglect. The chapter closed on paper, but not in us. We had a criminal case on our hands. We had a community ruptured. And most dangerously, we had a story that would be told and retold by people who wanted different endings. Next, the courtroom. Evidence. Witnesses who break under pressure. And a reveal no one expects, including me. I took my seat the morning the trial began and felt the courtroom like a living thing. Its would grain a history of decisions. Its bench a place where truth was asked to stand in bright light. I returned to the role I had trained for my entire life, but now with a family's ashes still warm on my hands. I had recused in administrative steps, but the higher court allowed me to oversee procedural issues. The defense argued for a full recusal. The prosecution objected. The appellate clock ticked. For the public, the question was simple. Could a judge be neutral about a case that cut so near? I could give you the legal arguments, the citations, the motions, but what matters in a courtroom is always the human footage. The way a witness hesitates, the tilt of a head under cross-examination, the apparitions of truth and lie playing out in testimony. The first witnesses were neighbors. A man who saw Karen pacing her porch the week prior. A woman who testified that Karen had told her, "I won't let those kids run wild in my street." Then the forensic team took the stand, the technicians who can make smoke and glass recite the past. They explained the bullet trajectory. They described powder residue indicating the shot came from a distance closer than Karen's claim of a startled panic. They matched the casings to the gun registered in Karen's name. On day 3, Karen's defense painted a different picture. A woman afraid for her safety. A homeowner worn out by trespasses and late-night parties. They called character witnesses. A pastor who spoke of Karen's decades of charity. A neighbor who insisted she was no danger. In the gallery, murmurs shifted. The jury listened, the kind of people juries often are, ordinary, carrying their own small grievances, ready to be persuaded. The most brutal moments came on cross-examination. A teenager who had been with Layla that night sat in the witness chair, fingers twisted. When asked what happened, he could only say, "We were laughing. She just..." And then the word collapsed into a ragged sound. He watched Layla's mom as if pleading for permission to exist. People who have never been in the courtroom do not realize how contagious tears are. You can feel them move like a tide. Then the turning point. A surveillance clip from a neighbor's Ring camera. It was shaky, night-primed, but it caught an image of Karen lifting a rifle in a controlled motion, aiming not into the sky, but down the street. The frame where it happens was a single, unblinking thing. The courtroom took a breath and held it. During deliberations, the defense attempted to introduce doubt. That the bullet path could have been altered by ricochet, that Layla's position was partially obscured, that the gun might have been fired accidentally during a scuffle. They painted Layla as a child in the wrong place. It was a cruel calculus of blame. Throughout the trial, I battled a private, quieter conflict. Every time I banged the gavel to call for order, I felt my family's heartbeat in my palm. I had to rule on motions that affected the jury's view, what evidence could come in, what references were prejudicial. My rulings were precise. My voice, thin with the strain of being a human instrument built to be steady. Colleagues who had been judges with me called and asked if I needed to step down. I declined. The wheels of justice were already turning. On cross-examination, Karen revealed something the prosecution had not expected. A history of voicemails, obsessive complaints, and a recent restraining request she claimed to have filed and then withdrawn because she feared retaliation. The tone shifted. A new motive crawled through the transcript. Paranoia fueled by perceived lawlessness, a conviction that only she could police the street. She testified with a brittle calm, insisting she had fired a warning that went wrong. But facts press hard. The ballistics expert testified that the angle of the shot matched a downward aim that could not reasonably be described as a warning fired into the air. An eyewitness, a mail carrier who seldom spoke of anything, recounted that Karen had been practicing at a private range in the weeks before the event. That undercut the idea of a trembling, accidental finger. It suggested something else: preparedness. The defense tried to humanize her with a montage of photos showing Karen at community tea drives and holiday dinners. The prosecutor replied with hospital photos of a small, bruised body and a mother who broke on the stand, sobbing in a voice that sounded like it was being scraped raw. The contrast was savage. Community volunteer and convicted shooter existing in the same skin. Once the jury retired, the city seemed to inhale as if waiting with us. The foreperson returned after hours that felt like centuries. I asked the usual questions: guilty or not guilty on each count. Their words were brief but seismic. Guilty on the count of aggravated assault. Guilty on the count of reckless endangerment. Guilty on the count of voluntary manslaughter in the second degree. Karen's reaction was less theatrical than anyone expected. She smiled, not with triumph, but with a slackness that looked like someone who had been moving for so long that stopping caused the muscles to seize. In the public gallery, people wept and some shouted. We had the veneer of justice, a verdict rendered, but puzzles remained. Sentencing is where the law meets the human ledger of harm. I listened to victim impact statements that read like hymns of shattered normalcy. I listened to Karen's dwindled defense, to the claim that the system had failed her in other ways. In my chamber, I wrote words intended to carry weight across both private grief and public safety. The sentence I handed down was significant, enough to mark the gravity of taking a child's life, and yet within the bounds the statute allowed. After sentencing, the neighborhood didn't magically heal. The HOA board changed hands. People who had stood on porches watched the leaves fall with a new kind of caution. My sister moved. Layla's friends started a scholarship fund in her name. There were protests, some calling for harsher punishment, others alleging bias in the trial. The defense filed an appeal. Our lives folded around the hinge of what had happened. For me, the role of being judge in what had become the most personal case of my career left a lasting dent. I knew I had made the best ruling I could under the law and the evidence. But justice is not a salve that heals all wounds. It is a public accounting of wrong, not always the closure people imagine it will be. Years later, I sit in court and sometimes catch myself watching a kid's laugh bubble up in the gallery, and I remember Layla. Not as evidence, not as a case number, but as the small, bright person she was. The community remembers, too. They erect memorials in unexpected places. A painted skateboard rack, a bench under a maple tree. The legal record keeps the facts. The rest of us carry the rest. If there's a final note to this story, it's this: neighborhoods have rules and rules are meant to hold us together. But when a person weaponizes the resentment inside them, the rulebook can't fix the wound. Only people can repair what law marks, And sometimes, even when the law speaks, we still have to teach one another how to be human. If this shook you, share it. Let more people hear Layla's name. Subscribe for part breakdowns and behind-the-scenes questions about how courts actually work. Drop in the comments. What would you have done that night? I read every single one.